Good afternoon, I'm Savannah Kelly. Welcome to APTN National News. A sudden pause to the Canada-Manitoba Housing Benefit is impacting some of the province's most vulnerable, youth aging out of care and people at risk of homelessness. Reporter Sierra Bettens speaks to advocates to learn more about the consequences.
Up to 400 people across Winnipeg are in limbo after a housing benefit was unexpectedly halted. In early August, the Manitoba government paused the youth and homelessness streams of the Canada-Manitoba Housing Benefit, or CMHB, which provides a rent top-up for low-income and at-risk populations. However, community organizations and participants say they were not informed of the pause until the end of August. Shauna McKinnon is a professor at the University of Winnipeg's Department of Urban and Inner City Studies and a member of the Right to Housing Coalition. She says applicants may have already applied for housing, thinking the benefit would help cover costs.
The assumption is that they're going to get the benefit. So they signed agreements and then they go and they apply for the supplement because they can't get the benefit until they actually have a signed agreement. So then there is no agreement. If they can't get the benefit, then people don't have the housing because they can't pay for it.
The two CMHB streams that were paused serve demographics that are disproportionately Indigenous. According to End Homelessness Winnipeg's 2022 street census, 68.2% of Winnipeg's homelessness population identified as Indigenous, and about 90% of children under CFS care in Manitoba are Indigenous. Mary Burton is the executive director of Zungizi Ode. The organization helps families and youth aging out of CFS care.
We work with a lot of youth who are aging out of care and a lot of youth who are transitioning from homelessness into their first apartments or their first place, whatever have you. And without that benefit, they're not going to be able to get a decent place to live.
In October, the organization plans to open a group of transitional housing units, but without the CMHB, Burton is worried.
Right now, we're working on a transitional house with Raising the Roof and Slow Mission. And the people that will be moving into that home are families that are reunifying with their children. Without that extra benefit, it's going to be hard to house people in our home.
Manitoba's NDP government vowed to end chronic homelessness in 2 terms. McKinnon argues that pausing the benefit is a step back. But while she believes the CMHB is a necessary measure, she said it's not a long-term solution to the housing crisis.
What we really need is a consistent supply of housing that rents at levels that are affordable to people, because that gives people more security, knowing that there's housing out there that they can afford.
APTN requested an interview with Housing, Addictions and Homelessness Minister Bernadette Smith. However, she was not made available. In a statement sent to APTN, the minister said the province is committed to ending chronic homelessness and blamed the previous government for not investing in long-term housing solutions. They are reviewing CMHB applications, determining the best course of action, and looking at a variety of solutions to prevent homelessness. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
On Thursday, the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan announced that it's withdrawing from the Métis National Council immediately. The announcement comes just days before the MNC was to hold its annual General Assembly to elect a new president. That vote and AGA were previously postponed before MNS made its announcement yesterday. For more on this, Dennis Ward spoke with Michelle Leclerc. She's Vice President of Métis Nation Saskatchewan.
Vice President Leclerc, thanks so much for taking some time for us here today. Can you tell us why Métis Nation Saskatchewan decided today to leave the Métis National Council?
Yeah, well, this has sort of been in the works for a bit. We have heard from our citizens that, we are forging our own self-government path here. We're, near to the end of our negotiations of our treaty. And our treaty goes to our citizens in the next while, and so it was one of the things that we decided as our citizens had instructed us that we needed to be on our own path. And Saskatchewan is a long, storied history of Métis people in this province, and so we decided that this was the path that we were going to take. As you probably know, Dennis, we left Bill C-53 some time ago, and we just felt that our concerns and growing concerns about the situation in Ontario, and that the Métis National Council wasn't really being a strong advocate in that place, and we felt that we could be obviously our own advocate, both nationally, provincially, and internationally.
Yeah, concerns have been raised for years over the Métis Nation of Ontario registry and the inclusion of the 7 new historic, Métis communities. Was there something in particular that led to this final decision to pull out of MNC?
I don't think that there was anything that was really sort of that turned the corner on it. Other than, I guess there was some issues around the MNC was postponing their annual general meeting. There was a number of issues that really we thought, when we look at ourselves and the path that we're going on, is a strong path of self-government and self-determination. And our citizens and our council, believe that we advocate for ourselves in Saskatchewan and that we don't need the Métis National Council. We don't need, to be involved in controversy that we don't own. And there's potential for it to stand in the way of the rights and the wishes of our citizens.
It was just last year that the Métis National Council celebrated its 40th year. Now with the MMF, Manitoba Métis Federation, pulling out in 2021 and Métis Nation Saskatchewan no longer part of it, what do you think that means for the future of the MNC?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think, they're going to have to, the MNC is going to have to reflect on who they are, why they're here, and where they go, if anywhere, from today on. The Métis National Council is actually has 3 founding members. That's Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And then, of course, Ontario and British Columbia are part of that board of governors. You really have to have 2 governing members to make quorum. And so they are left with 1, which will probably frustrate their bylaws, and they'll have to, sort of go from there. What does the Métis National Council look like, and do they really represent the interests and the voices of Métis people in the prairie provinces, specifically Manitoba and Saskatchewan?
I know this is about Métis Nation Saskatchewan moving forward and speaking on behalf of their citizens, but given what you just said, is this also, do you think, the end of MNC?
I really don't want to speculate on that. Given some of the things that I said, they're really going to have to reflect on, and as I said, their bylaws will be frustrated, so they'll have to. There'll be a legal way of sort of trying to figure out how they change their bylaws, if in fact they will do that.
Vice President Leclerc, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thanks so much for having me.
In a statement, a spokesperson for the Métis National Council says, quote, "We respect the decision of the MNS." The statement says President Cassidy Caron will be meeting with MNC's governing members to discuss next steps. Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand congratulated Métis Nation Saskatchewan for, quote, "taking an important step forward in support of the integrity of Métis identity and our homeland." You can find much more on this on our website, aptnnews.ca. A 6-year-old boy from the remote fly-in community of Shamattawa Cree Nation, 750 kilometers north of Winnipeg, has been missing since Wednesday morning. Family and community members started searching for Johnson Redhead after he didn't show up for class after participating in the school breakfast program Wednesday morning. They were joined by the RCMP detachment in the community. Members of the Canadian Rangers who live in the community were also called in for what is being described as a large-scale search. RCMP are expecting a police dog and drone to be added to the search today. Members of Parliament return to Ottawa this week, and what does it mean for Indigenous peoples? We speak to our Truth in Politics panel after this short break. Stay with us. 14 First Nations on Vancouver Island are under a state of emergency. They say the provincial and federal governments have failed in reversing the course of the overdose and mental health crisis. As a result, the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council is asking for funding so it can lead the response to the crisis itself. CTV's Anna McMillan reports.
These are mothers, fathers.
Gathered in a formal residential school building, members of the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council still bear the weight of what happened here.
And we're all suffering from the intergenerational trauma that happened right here, right in this very building that we're standing in.
That pain is manifesting as a mental health and opioid crisis. And now the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council is declaring a state of emergency in all 14 of its member nations.
Funerals that used to be once a month have now gone to 2 to 3 a week.
There has been a string of losses, including a death in a Howsett First Nation that police say is suspicious.
You know, the call for mental health support has been really appreciated on behalf of the families and the community members that have been affected by this.
Nuu-chah-nulth territory spans much of Vancouver Island's west coast, a huge swath of land that the Tribal Council says has few resources for people who are suffering.
We've seen British Columbia declare a state of emergency 8 years ago on this, and what has changed? So maybe it's time to change hands. We just want to lead it.
They're asking the provincial and federal governments to fund various resources, including detox beds and crisis supports, along with improved emergency services for remote communities such as a Howsett.
We're looking at approximately an hour and a half from time of a call to be able to actually get true medical service to our people.
Island Health says it's moving forward with plans to offer sobering and assessment services in Tofino, and it also has plans for up to 10 recovery beds in Port Alberni.
We're asking British Columbians to ask their candidates running in this next provincial election, what are you going to do about it?
In the face of such agony, there is hope.
I think by embracing and sharing the love and the teachings and the strength with our children as they prosper and grow into healthy, strong adults, that they'll carry that work forward naturally.
Work, they say, must happen urgently so no one else is lost. Anna McMillan, CTV News.
The 150th anniversary of the signing of Treaty Number 4 was held in Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan last week, and members of Parliament returned to Ottawa this week. What does it all mean for Indigenous peoples? Our Truth in Politics panel spoke with our Dennis Ward about these subjects. Jennifer Leywitz is a partner with Harbour Pasqua Strategies in Prince Albert, and Neegon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press.
Jennifer, Neegon, thanks for being with us. Neegon, we'll start with you here in studio. Do you think the Trudeau minority government is going to fall anytime soon?
Well, not according to what the Bloc says. The Bloc says that they're interested in a partnership and a relationship. I think the Bloc looks to see how much the NDP has been able to achieve with the Liberals, and for this very small window of time that the Liberals have left in office, and by all accounts will probably either have a leadership change or a government change, the Bloc probably wants to get some work done. So the Bloc will probably play ball with the government.
Jennifer, been a pretty wild week so far, the return to Parliament here. Do you think, though, that we're going to be seeing an election anytime soon?
It's hard to say. I think the Liberals at this point will do pretty much anything to avoid that. You know, we saw Jagmeet Singh say that he ripped up the deal, which I don't think anybody really knows what that means, because he said the deal is done, but as of today, he went on record to say the deal is very much not done. However, at this point, he's just not getting anything in exchange for keeping the Liberals in power. The Bloc, however, this will be really interesting to see because, you know, the Bloc leader has went on record today to say that he's there to serve Quebecers. So what is that going to look like for Canadians across the country to know that essentially the Liberal government is being propped up by a party that cares about one province and one province only? At this point, it kind of just feels like we're patching up the Titanic until the inevitable end.
Right. Nigan, while we patch up, there are a few pieces of legislation still going through Parliament, like Bill C-61, the First Nations Clean Water Act. Do you think that some of this stuff is going to get passed?
Oh, I think that for sure. I think it's just too much on the agenda of the NDP to try to get a record going into the federal election. You can already see the NDP coming out to Canadians and saying, here's our record. And one of the big problems, of course, is that the Liberals really inhabit most of the space of what the NDP historically has done on Indigenous issues. And so what the NDP certainly wants to do is get a win, several series of wins, and be able to claim that they've advocated for Indigenous communities. So undoubtedly they will encourage the Liberals to pass that water legislation and do it before the end of Parliament.
And Jennifer, those are just a couple things. I mean, it's the $47 billion child welfare reform. There's a lot of stuff out there still. With everyone, saying they're going to go to the polls or going to continue to threaten to go to the polls, are you expecting anything concrete to come out of this session?
I don't think I'm expecting to see anything more concrete in terms of promises. I really was hoping to see that out of Jagmeet Singh and the NDP at the beginning of this confidence and supply deal. I think there was a real opportunity to highlight reconciliation efforts and to move them forward. We look at the TRC calls to action, and last year there were 0 completed. So at the end of the day, Indigenous issues seem to be last priority for pretty much everybody. And even in the context of a minority government and the potential of an election coming, although there's some big issues on the table right now, at the end of the day, I don't have a lot of hope that that'll even be taken into consideration if an election is triggered.
We wanted to touch on something else big here this past week. Jennifer, we'll start with you because you were there. It's been 150 years since Treaty 4 was signed, handing over a large chunk of Manitoba and Saskatchewan to the Crown. You were out there. Was this reason to celebrate?
It's a really interesting situation for me, and I was actually talking to a band counselor from a nation in Treaty 4 yesterday about it almost being conflicting, because there are chiefs that are having that discussion about what was the, we know the benefit of the signing of the treaty, but at the end of the day, we're still discussing in modern context whether or not that was the best route, and do nations actually want to be a part of that treaty now? And I have a little bit of a personal tie to it. If you look at the Treaty 4 articles, you'll see the name Charles Pratt, and that was like my 4 or 5 times great grandpa, which should surprise nobody that I descended from somebody that was involved at the end of the day, given how outspoken and opinionated I could be. But it's interesting because you think, wow, it's been 150 years, and where are we today? And is the spirit and intent of treaty still being honored? And, you go to these celebrations and you hear the speeches, you see the chiefs, and you can't help but feel the advocacy in the room. But then we leave and modern life just continues and the advocacy still continues.
Well, Nigan, speaking of modern days, there's a lot going on with treaty lately when it comes to annuity payments, things like cows and plows. What do you think the significance is of Treaty 4 today, 150 years later?
Well, I just certainly echo what Jennifer was saying in terms of outstanding claims and related to treaty. We are in the first wave, meaning about a year and a half, the very first wave of the impacts of Bill C-15, which is bringing Canadian law in concert with Indigenous rights. And what does that mean? That means that for the very first time in history, we are seeing provinces, BC and Manitoba in particular, but we're also seeing federal departments having to commit to Indigenous rights. I was just training a series of judges in Manitoba recently who have never been trained on Indigenous rights. Most of them have no idea what it means or the impact that it involves. And so for the first time are including that in things like criminal trials or in property trials. So what does that mean? That means that we're seeing First Nations for the first time with their outstanding treaty claims, having those embodied or embedded within negotiations with the federal government. That's where cows and plows comes in. That's where the raise of the annuities are the issues that, $5 just don't gonna cut it anymore. We're talking about back in 1871, $5 a year's annuity. What does that look like today? Well, that involves billions of dollars that are owed to First Nations because simply we have rights over the land, and for the very first time in history, Canadian law must recognize that right. Just never mind all the other things with child welfare, with all the other things involving Indigenous language rights and so on. I mean, all of those things are now on the table, and you can't turn it back even if there is a change in government and a change in leadership at the federal level.
Bringing it full circle there, that was a lot to cram into 1 week's panel. Nigan and Jennifer, thanks to you both.
Yeah, Miigwech, thanks.
Now let's take a look at this week's website poll question. Do you know how the federal carbon tax works? Yes, no, unsure, or what's that? Visit our website at aptnnews.ca to weigh in. We need to take one more short break. Still to come, we'll bring you a look at a momentous occasion for us here at APTN. Stick around. Starting off on the East Coast, 21 degrees and rain for Halifax, 20 degrees in Charlottetown. Rainy and 8 degrees in Nain, Kuujjuaq, 17. Saguenay, sunshine, 23 degrees, Quebec City, plus 20. Peterborough, rainy and 23 degrees there, Sault Ste. Marie, plus 24. Timmins, rainy and 25, as well as Kapuskasing. Churchill, rainy and 19 there, Norway House, plus 11. Winnipeg, rainy and 15 degrees there, as well as Gimli and Dauphin. Rainy and 19 degrees in Regina, Saskatoon, plus 15. Stony Rapids, mix of sun and clouds, 16 degrees there. Meadow Lake, rainy and 16. Sunshine and 17 degrees for Fort Chip, high level, rainy and 16 degrees. Calgary, sunshine, 16 there. Medicine Hat, rainy and plus 12. Vancouver, mostly sunny and 18 degrees. Bella Coola, rainy and 17. Fort Nelson, mostly sunny, 12 degrees there. Smithers, rainy and 15. Watson Lake, rainy and 12 degrees. Rock River, plus 5. Wrigley, mostly sunny, 11 degrees. Yellowknife, plus 11 there as well. Paulatuck, rainy and 9 degrees. Colville Lake, mix of sun and cloud, 9 degrees. Baker Lake, plus 5 and rainy there. Arviat, plus 8. Iqaluit, mix of sun and cloud, 5 degrees, and 10 for Clyde River. It was a momentous occasion for APTN after celebrating our 25th anniversary and the launch of our new APTN Languages channel. Yesterday, closing the market at the Toronto Stock Exchange. TMX Group celebrated APTN's 25-year history of telling First Nations, Métis, and Inuit stories. APTN's CEO, Monica Ely, was joined by others to help close the market. Ely says APTN has come a long way since we first launched back in September of 1999.
First of all, launching a network, that's a big accomplishment for Indigenous stories, Indigenous languages, doing all types of programming from documentary to drama, children and youth, and our news team, having our own Indigenous news unit.
And that's all the time we have for your midday news this Friday. Dennis Ward will be here in a few hours for your evening newscast. Make sure to join us then. And for news anytime, head over to our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly, Marcy Miigwech. Thank you for joining us.